Joining me now for more on this and the rest of the day's news is National Senator M.Canavan. Senator, it's nice to catch up with you. Thanks so much for joining me. Firstly, what is your reaction to today's interest rates decision?
Well, look, it's disappointing for Australian families. They've been doing it tough now for the last 3 years under this Labor government. Living standards have never dropped this fast. And a big part of the reasons is the very high interest rates we've seen over the past 3 years. And that's adding to someone with the average home loan. It's adding about $12,000 a year to their home loan repayments. That's a lot of money. So I think Australian families were expecting this relief. I mean, the key reason why we're not seeing interest rates fall is because under Labor, we've seen the biggest and steepest fall in productivity levels in our nation's history. In the first 3 years of the Labor government, productivity fell by more than 5% in Australia. Now, there's never been anything like that. Over a 3-year period, the biggest reduction prior to that had been 0.5% during the recession we had to have under Paul Keating. So, you had the biggest fall over a 3-year period of being 0.5%. Then Anthony Albanese comes along, not only breaks this record fall in productivity, he smashes it and ends up with more than 10 times that fall under Paul Keating to over 5%. That's why interest rates are a lot higher than they need to be, because if we're not producing as much as we used to, which we're not, that means there's too much money out there chasing too few goods. And the Reserve Bank, therefore, has to keep interest rates higher for longer than they otherwise would be. Now, finally, you see Jim Chalmers is convening a productivity roundtable. He didn't invite the Productivity Commission to his Jobs and Skills Summit 3 years ago. I bet you they're regretting that decision. Now they're having a productivity roundtable, but it seems to have morphed from what was meant to be about productivity to just simply be about how high we can jack taxes on the rest of the country to save their failing budget. So I don't know if this is going to deliver the economic dividend or the interest rate reductions we could have if we had a serious agenda to have a stronger economy.
Good point. A couple of days ago, he flagged that there will be some sort of tax reform. Today, he was even asked about the GST, and he got very testy about it. So, who knows what's to come? I think you're spot on there, Matt. Now, look, a lot of talk about the global impact on the rates decision. Donald Trump has kept the conversation alive about his tariffs as he unveiled a whole new raft of ones. He's told about 14 trade partners via a letter that sharply higher tariffs will begin at the start of August. But I found this to be interesting, Matt. The Productivity Commission here says that Australia will actually benefit from some of the tariffs because some global capital flows will be redirected towards us. What do you make of that?
Well, we've seen that. I mean, we saw a few months ago the Chicken Littles among us all saying the sky was going to fall in because Donald Trump made an announcement on tariffs. But when you looked at the detail, you could see that, take, for example, Australian beef, it was going to go into the US at a 10% tariff. And our big competitors in the beef market in the US are Canada and Mexico, and they were facing a 25% tariff. So clearly it was going to be a good news for Australian beef, but that level of detail was missed in the original reporting. I'm up here in the beef capital in central Queensland, and the beef industry has done very, very well since the announcement in Australia, as has many other Australian industries. So we're just not seeing those dire conclusions, and I know the government would love to be able to blame Donald Trump for him eating their homework, but that's not the reason our economy is in the doldrums, and it's not having a huge impact. On the broader issue, I mean, Donald Trump is calling out the high tariffs and high protection levels of other countries. I think we've got off largely scot-free for now because we haven't had those high barriers. But, for example, everyone talks about Donald Trump's tariffs, but our Australian beef still faces a 25% tariff to get into Japan. I mean, people don't talk about that. It's a 25% tariff to go to Japan. Now, we still export a lot of beef to Japan, but that's their trade barriers. They have very high trade barriers in many Asian countries and European countries, and they've got away with it for a long time. Now, they all say they support free trade. Now that Donald Trump's acted, well, how about they actually practice what they preach?
Yeah, absolutely. You're not wrong. Nobody speaks about that beef. You're right. Now, look, I was shocked when I read this morning, Matt. More than $1.5 million of our money was spent sending at least 75 public servants to a UN climate change summit in Azerbaijan last year. It was an average cost of 20 grand a head. It's also been revealed that at the last 3 conferences of the party summits, the Australian pavilion on the conference floor cost about $1 million each. You'd think it's a joke, Matt, but no, it's not. That's how much we're spending of taxpayers' money to go look at climate change when we can't even keep the lights on in our own backyard?
How the hell can you spend 20 grand a head on well, the conference only goes for a few days. Well, most of the delegates are surely only there for a few days. How do you spend $20,000 per person? I mean, I'd go on a pretty good European holiday. $20,000, I think we all would. But I'm not asking for that. I don't think the taxpayers should be funding that. And I don't think they should be funding this rubbish, because the other question to ask here is, what have they got? What have they delivered for this enormous spending? The whole time we've been going to these climate conferences, guess what? Carbon emissions continue to go up. In fact, since the Glasgow Climate Conference, where the world apparently signed for net zero emissions, coal mining in China, India, Indonesia and Mongolia has increased by 1.2 billion tonnes a year. That's the increase.
Wow.
We only produce in Australia every year 450 million tonnes. So nearly 3 times that amount has been the increase in those countries. So it's all been for naught, and maybe some of these officials have had a wonderful European or other, wherever they go these days, holiday at the taxpayers' dime. And keep in mind, this is just the very thin edge of the wedge. The Labor Party now wants to host the whole shebang. They want to host the climate change conference here in Australia next year. That Glasgow conference I just mentioned, that cost UK taxpayers $500 million Australian. And so that's about what the bill will be up for. This could be Voice 2.0. Yeah. Well, this will be Anthony Albanese's second-term Voice, where he spends $500 million on a useless climate conference that produces no results, just like the Voice did, and it's money we have to borrow. We don't have it.
No, exactly. I mean, it just baffles the mind that they want to hold it here in Australia. What an absolute waste of money. Before we let you go, the Prime Minister today has confirmed that he will visit China this weekend. 4 meetings with China, Matt, none with the US. Why is the Prime Minister so at ease with China?
Well, I think people will probably draw their own conclusions there. I think the problem is that the Prime Minister, as he said once, is he's in politics to fight Tories. He's not, he didn't, when he was asked why are you in politics, he didn't say it's to defend our country, to pursue the best interests of Australia. It was to defeat Tories. So clearly the Albanese government has been in a period of mourning since Donald Trump won the election in the United States, because they don't like right-wing and conservative people winning elections. Now, Xi Jinping's not right-wing or conservative. He's communist, so they feel closer to him. But they've got it. When you leave our shores, when you leave Australia and go and represent the Australian government, you need to put those partisan political interests aside and put the nation's interests first. And this is a very scary time for our country, because clearly our nation's interests continue to be to have a strong relationship with the United States, our most important friend and ally in the region, a fellow democratic country with a long history with, fighting alongside whoever is in the White House. That has to happen.
Absolutely.
And clearly an aggressive totalitarian regime who has recently conducted live fire exercises underneath a civilian flight path near Australia without warning, is not this kind of friend or ally like the United States is. So the PM has got some explaining to do to the Australian people, and I don't think he's being upfront with Australians about why he hasn't gone to Washington DC to visit Donald Trump.
No, and you just gave one example there, but this is why we need the US more than ever. M.Canavan, good to catch up. Thanks so much for joining me on the show this evening. Well, Liberal candidates in battleground seats could be chosen by